heard the last speaker for this session and for the evening, for the day, is Professor Sharda Srinivasan. She's a professor at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, NIAS, Bangalore. She has made pioneering contributions to the study of archaeology and history of art from the perspective of exploring engineering applications in these disciplines. I've actually had to cut short the introductions for everybody, so I missed out the point here, but very important to say that she's herself a classical dancer as well, and she's also received a Padma Shri Award in Archaeology in 2019 from the President of India. So very honored to have you here.
So very good evening to you all, and congratulations again to the team of Design Dialogues and Ishita for very out-of-the-box thinking and putting together this very imaginative series of talks, and I wish it all success. And I should say that the two speakers, distinguished speakers before me, Dr. Deepti Navaratna and Miti, have set the stage excellently and said really all, and so much more that's to be said on this very interesting deliberations to do with the play of knowledge systems. So I will perhaps indulge myself more than all of you. I think in just maybe going back on a journey through some of my performative pieces, so to speak, and then try and maybe contextualize them within some of these questions that have been going on, because I think that's another aspect of pedagogy to do with dance also, that we don't really do that much of reflection on creative work in the way that they do in the West maybe and things. And in my case, I guess, as was pointed out by all of you, and I think also Deepti, that you have these three dimensions here of pedagogy, preservation and performance. And so I've had, let's say, dabbled in a bit of those in different ways, coming in as an engineering physicist. Then I also had, of course, some years of experience as a Bharatanatyam dancer. So, and then as an archaeologist, I went back to dance in a way, rather like Miti said, that it was after design that she went back to dance. I had a hiatus, and I went back also because, of course, I was studying sculpture and art history and so on, and as you will see here, some of the reflections also to do with the Nataraja bronze, which is a great inspiration for dancers. But in my case, I was also studying them scientifically in terms of the compositional analysis. So it all sort of was something which I felt it wasn't enough for me to understand academically, but I had to do something with it as well creatively. And then, of course, there's also the dimension, I think Miti also pointed out to that, the importance of the body itself as a transmitter, as a performer, which I think as you get older, you get so much more aware of it, because in a way your mind, you're thinking and you're philosophizing, the capacity of your mind to understand grows, but the ability of your body to transmit and to carry forth those ideas actually diminishes. So so of course we do have these visual media and so on which transmit it here. So maybe that's why I'm also taking recourse to the videos here, because in my case also I have a bit of a disability now, so I can't actively perform. So it is, but still it's nice to do it in a way vicariously, I suppose. So I thought I'd just show some of these videos which maybe try and touch upon how, as an archaeologist or an academic, there is now also, I suppose, this practice-based dimension which makes you see things perhaps differently when you try and put yourself in that space as well as a creative practitioner maybe. So the first video that I'm going to show is from a very interesting site called Sanganakallu. Well, that's not, that's just the video more to do with the site itself and some photographs and things like that, which you might have heard of. It's a Neolithic site in North Karnataka, and it's actually one of the places where you have very early emanations of expressions of, of experimenting with sound. And because these rocks that they have there, the dolerite rocks, they have a certain tonality. Of course, coming to sound, we've looked at many of the philosophical aspects to it, but when you look at it as a scientist, sound happens because objects vibrate. And then that's not enough because in quantum we have sound in outer space, but then you have to have molecules which transmit those. So where and how these Neolithic people chanced upon these sounds and then saw it as something different from the natural sounds they were hearing, and actually sort of because what does come across is these cupules on the rocks where the finger marks and things like that were there, that there is an intentionality, and when you play it you realize that the tonalities come. And I was going around looking at some of those the rock formations and cupules, and where the locations of the rock art are, and you clearly see, as you will see in that, these rows of dancers holding hands and things like that. So clearly it was some kind of space, a performative space, where it's a ritual space. And also you have to admire their sense, as you will see, of a kind of multimedia, sensory interaction with the space, where you have the rock art, you have the cupules, and perhaps also there was one which I felt might well have been, of course I'm sure that here might well have been a location for a mating ritual, because you have some of that kind of rock art and some of these cupules. And so it's a way in which they were linking their inner space and outer space, and that's a theme again which I think, the linking of the inner space and the outer space, which keeps resonating throughout, particularly in the Indian traditions, as Nidhi and others have already spoken about, where it connects music, dance, architecture, and so many other things come together. So I'll start with a clip with Sanginakalu, and then move on to Hirebenkal, and then some of my, if you all are still able to sit through some of the work to do with the interactive dance, and then inspired by the Nataraja, and as well, I suppose, a coming together of science and art and inner space and outer space and all those things. Yeah. But you can see that line of the dancers on that side over there. And typically, of course, you have a lot of these depictions of the rock shelter. These are what we call the cupules. You see the edge of this dolerite, where you can see where these palm marks sort of fit in. And that was a very well-known archaeologist known as Ravi Korishettar, who was also up there with us. And there's one of these boulders on which you can have quite a few people performing or playing it, all around it. And that had that backdrop of, the rock art with the Zibo bull and, several of those dancing figures and things like that. So this dolerite is, of course, an iron-rich material, which is why it has those kinds of tonalities. And of course, in later times, some people have gone and maybe cut them up a bit and all. But anyway, this is just me having fun with all that. And very spectacular, the locations, and very inaccessible. So these were clearly people who had a visual sense and some kind of idea of aesthetics. Because this is also a very interesting question in archaeology, or even in the way history of science and technology comes about. I sense of knowledge systems and so on is reality come before aesthetics. So what drives the production of knowledge in a way? Is it the functionality or aesthetics? And in fact, you find sometimes when you look at the complexity of early archaeological, let's say, societies, whether it's Egypt and all that, so the obsession in fact seems to be with maybe aesthetics and ritual and so on. So it's not necessarily that it's the functionality of the artifact, which we think of in a very scientific sort of positivist sort of way of looking at things, that it's the function that drives a lot of innovation and so on. So this is an important aspect. Well, this slide just to show you the other side of the devastation. A lot of the granite around that area was being quarried down, and so preservation, unless we realize and appreciate what we have, we're not going to get to that task of preservation, and that's, I think, real challenge before us in all ways. So the next clip I was going to show was from a site called Hirebenkal, which, as you saw, I got interested in this idea of the tonality of rocks and so on, and it's something which is an ongoing, technical investigation and so on. But of course, yes, you all would be very familiar with Hampi and the tonality of the so-called musical pillars, and whether they're intentional or not. Anyway, so this was a bit of a foray into the megalithic site of Hirebenkal, which is some 35 kilometers outside of Hampi. And again, you have, of course, this incredible, landscape in the midst of, in fact, this porphyritic granite of the Hampi region. It's one of the oldest rock formations. And clearly it must have had some, iron-rich constituents and all that, which give off this kind of tonality. And this side of Hirebenkal has these spectacular dolmens with portholes and really well, circularly cut, slabs and things like that. And so I've been there with, this musician from France, who'd been performing in the Alps and so on. He's a lithophonist who'd been playing with musical rocks and things like that in the Alps, where you do have these, other kinds of rock formations would have these kinds of tonalities. So he was out, so we'd gone out to Hirebenkal, and in the quarry area he'd been just looking at all that. And we found one spot where they had this, this slab placed like that, and very strategically there was a bit cut off like this, and a small rock kept there, which Sebastian spotted, and he started playing that. And it really gave the impression of being a performance space. So anyway, this was me just enjoying it. And the interesting thing is that, when you think of Bharatanatyam, it's very much about the rapport with the ground, because they say that you, in fact, even your namaskaram and all that, you touch the ground and you beg the forgiveness of, the Bhumi Mata and so on. And here you have this tonality of this rock. So the thing we're really kind of struck by when you're performing is that the rock is resonating back. And that almost makes you feel that this must have been an important part of maybe the very early repertoire of dance, which then moves into something like Bharatanatyam, and in a way, and that also gives it another context for placing the antiquity of this art form within this kind of milieu as well. I mean, of course, the later textual traditions are also one things as they come along, but I think we also need to recognize that some of these faceless communities like Neolithic and Megalithic and so on, they have also contributed perhaps in more intangible ways as well to our cultural resources and things like that, and it's not only restricted to, let's say, the great cultures and traditions and so on. So yeah, look at that. Boiling hot as well, my god, I don't know, 50 degrees or something, it's like feet on fire. So anyway, so the next couple of pieces is, they're excerpts of, as I was talking about, now we have this practice-based research and so on. I don't know quite what I could describe it as, but it was some kind of experiment in which we were able to use some new technologies, which is the internet stream performance. This was a collaboration that I did with a French group whereby it was an internet stream performance where I was performing in Bangalore and there was a dancer performing in France, and of course it was all streamed via the Cité de l'Espace and the Indian Institute of Astrophysics, because this was a year of astronomy, so we had that good bandwidth. So basically we're dancing to each other's virtual image, And in it, we're trying to maybe convey some of these ideas of, the play of knowledge systems at one level, the play between, let's say, the classical and Descartesian world on the one hand, and the quantum mechanical, world, which is, much more mysterious and all the rest of it, and let's say the tangible and the intangible in that sense here. And so, of course, one aspect is represented by me as, drawing from the Bharatanatyam tradition, and the other dancer, Anusha, was a contemporary dancer. And it was, of course, also inspired by my research on the Nataraja bronze, and in terms of course, amongst one of the studies that I was doing was, of course, the technical analysis, which, using lead isotope analysis, which suggested that the bronze could be dated to the Pallava period. But then I collaborated with this astrophysicist, so we were also trying to explore that the iconography of the Nataraja may have been inspired by, the observances of the star positions of the Orion constellation, because of course in those days, they were a lot more in touch with the stars and things like that. They had very clear night skies and so on. And so, a bit on that, and the way in which there's two things going on there: the superposition of, let's say, the Orion on the body, but there's also the superposition of the dancers and so on. And I was also thought I'd show it also because we've been talking a lot about the Chandrayaan and the moon mission, and of course, as artists, we are of course very inspired by the iconography of the Nataraja in various ways, and the moon and the Ganges on top of the hair is a very important element. And so this also tries to look at the 5 elements and the water and so on. So this first piece dwells a bit on that aspect. Some of our let's say explorations into all of this, and I might just move myself a little bit here because I have a problem. I can't dance below here, but I can. My body still works. So maybe if I feel like it, I might just move, or I may not. But anyway, I'd like to share the clip with you. I'll move on to the last clip, which of the same production, where, as you saw, that Nataraja and the star charts. So, and I think for me that's also quite relevant, as we say that we talk about performance and materiality. But there's also the materiality of the body, and of course we're always trying to transcend it. But how we deal with, to me, there's also the metaphorical aspect of the Nataraja icon, where we've talked about creation emerging out of destruction and so on, which is what anyway, I won't go into all of that, but what some of the textual sources say that the icon actually represents. And there's also the actual physical aspect of that, like for instance, Serbian Mahadevi, who was a great patroness of the Nataraja bronzes, was also a widowed queen, and then you find that she's dedicating, the temples of Koneri, Rajapuram and so on to her late husband Gandharaditya Chola. So there is a real Jungian process there, perhaps, of creativity really emerging out of, let's say, physical loss and destruction and so on. So I've tried to combine a bit of that, and this also tries to, capture some of these ideas of the star chart plotting of the bronze, and which is in a way the destructive aspect, and Shanta, which is a peaceful aspect, and then of course Raudra and Shanta come together in the end. And here you see where technology takes off and creates its own parameters, because when both the virtual images actually come together, there's a totally new personality who emerges in the end. So anyway, we'll just take you through that. technological challenges, like for instance, you don't know whether that the machine, because the thingness of these things, the machine might just stop working. And I was at one point worried that I wouldn't see that virtual image and I'd be just dancing by myself, but it didn't. She did come back into the frame. So this is how I think technology and the interface with the humans, the cyborg interaction is the next big thing. So this is some of the directions in which thinking about knowledge production and so on. So thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. You really opened up our horizon towards the end of the day. We were thinking it will all come together, but at least I can speak for myself. I don't know how the audience feels, but you really opened us up to a different kind of exploration, and I can actually extend that observation for all the three speakers, that you really opened up new sort of questions and new areas for all of us to think about, and hopefully we will be able to engage in a conversation that we all still understand.